try to explain the larger context around the changes that we're experiencing as a society and put social media in the context of this tremendous tidal wave, this flood of information that's surrounding us right now. I call it the information tsunami. And my story begins with barbed wire. About 100 years ago, 110 years ago, the patents for the Bell telephone ran out. Those patents expired. And at that point, anybody could build a telephone. At the time, in the 1890s, the AT&T company was very focused on wiring up the cities on the East Coast, the big, vibrant cities on the East Coast. At that time, the West Coast, out here where we live, well, that was kind of no man's land for network connectivity. And so the Bell company simply wasn't going to spend the money to wire up a bunch of ranchers that were spread out all over the place in the West. They were focused on making money right now where they could, which was on the East Coast in the urban centers. But those hardy Western pioneers, well, they took matters into their own hands. All you needed was to order a telephone from Montgomery Ward or Sears, and the telephone would be shipped to you. And then you needed a wire. So you had the receiver, you had to connect it to a wire. Well, no one was stringing telephone wire out in the West. The Bell company wasn't willing to do that. But the cattle ranchers and farmers already had 1 million miles of barbed wire. Wire had been set up when they closed off the Great Plains, the Great West. And they decided to use that barbed wire. All they needed to do was take a beer bottle, cut the top off, and turn it into an insulator and wrap that around a pole. And wrap that wire around, and all those miles of barbed wire turned into a primitive telephone network. It wasn't the sophisticated network that you have today with operators. It wasn't the kind of telephone network where you could dial. It was a party line. And in fact, it was our first social medium. It was the first kind of electronic media where people could connect with each other. And people put this network to interesting uses. Because instead of being the tool that you use for business to call directly one person to another, you could pick up the call and anybody connected to that network, which could be dozens of ranchers in the neighboring community, could hear what you had to say. And many inventive uses came forth. People played music. They would have impromptu concerts over the telephone wire. They would tell the news. They would read the gossip. Sometimes there would be someone near a train station who could get the news wire. They could read what was happening elsewhere, and they had kind of a primitive news service that would happen. It was obviously a great source of local gossip. And so in a way, this was kind of our rancher version of the internet, the first iteration of social media. The point I'm making is simply this. There is no predestined or preordained dictate that requires all media to be broadcast media centrally controlled by a vertically integrated organization. That's our experience of media today. That's what mass media is all about, but that's in the process of changing because social media is now shifting that balance back to the users, back to the end users, and much like those ranchers of yore, we're starting to put these technologies to our own ends. We're starting to use these communication tools in our own ways. It's safe to predict at this stage, in 2011, that all media will be social media. Every type of medium, whether it's television, radio, music, every type of media will have some social component in it. We see examples of this every single day. Now, your experience at home, or many of the people you work with, are probably experiencing life like this right now, a sense of information overload, an incredible tidal wave of information that's coming to them. That's partly an artifact of the great surge of social media. When I was the head of digital at Sony Pictures back in the 1990s, I advised the Sony Pictures management at that time. I said, look, we need to focus on the fact that content is going to get lost in a glut of information because all of these new tools are coming online. And at that time, a movie studio wasn't really in the mode to contend with the internet. The internet was happening, but it was happening in the periphery of our business. It wasn't something that directly impacted the motion picture business in the 1990s, and so that warning went unheeded. There are three simple facts about information overload I want to share with you. The first one is that we have access to more media technology today than ever before in history. In 1995, back at the time when I was working at Sony Pictures, this is what a typical household had. This is the kind of electronic setup that a typical household had. And by any historical metric, this made those households powerful electronic cottages. We had televisions and telephones, cameras, and so forth, but very little of this was digital. And if you recall back to those days, you can also probably recall that most people weren't connected to the internet. Some of us had home computers, but very few of us were using dial-up services. Around 1995 was the time when consumer internet really began to take off for the first time. And so it's sort of pre-internet. I recall clearly that email was actually a very new thing in business in 1995. Now take a look at today's household. So in 2011, This is what a typical household has. We have more than 25 digital devices in almost every home in the United States. And they're incredibly versatile devices. Not only are they fully digital, with a microprocessor at the core in a form of a computer that's optimized for a particular type of media and entertainment, but most of these devices are also networked. They're designed to share information with each other. And so we've gone from a home that was kind of isolated to a home that's highly networked, where we have devices that are creating content and sharing content. They're designed for that at the outset. So that's one factor contributing to the incredible surge of information. The second factor is that we communicate more. Given all these new tools that we have, we communicate a lot more. Research here from Market Tools, where they surveyed people who work in business, they said, is the amount of information you're getting, the amount of communication you're doing, going up, staying the same, or going down? 85% said that it was either staying the same or going down. Very few people, in some cases single digits, said the amount was going down. So we actually are experiencing that as a culture. It's not just you. If you're feeling information overload, well, that's something that just about everybody in the world is starting to experience. We're also online more. We're spending more time. So not only do we have more ways to connect and more ways to communicate, but we're also spending a great deal of time online. Here's research from Magnify, which I thought was quite interesting. This is a survey of the owners of smartphones. And the question was, how much time do you spend connected? How many hours a day are you connected? An astonishing 48% said that they are online from the moment they wake up till the moment they go to bed. How many people do that? How many people wake up in the morning, turn on their cell phone, or maybe unplug it from the charger? Exactly. So more than half the people in this room, but naturally you're here at Social Media Week, more than half the people in this room have that experience themselves, where they're online from the minute they wake up, and then the last thing they do, perhaps they plug their phone in, check their email one more time, look for a text message, check their Twitter stream, and so forth. Not everybody handles this very well. These are new tools. You know, often you hear from people, they say social media is trivial, social media is junk, is garbage, there's a lot of chatter, it's meaningless. Well, sure, we're not in the habit of sharing information with each other. Some of us don't know quite what to do with these tools we've been given, and so we're just learning. We're the first generation that's had this incredible diversity of tools. And so some people get it wrong. This woman in Holland, for instance, was in trouble. She got arrested for phoning her boyfriend 65,000 times in 1 year. And she felt that that was normal. She said to the judge, that's a normal amount of communication. Well, that actually turns out to be 178 times a day. And get this, the guy she was calling said, I'm not her boyfriend. I'm not even her boyfriend. So some people don't handle these tools especially well. It's new for us. The third factor is that more people are connected. And so while we're experiencing this information overload and this incredible diversity of tools where we can communicate with each other, it's also true that the number of people around the world who can do this is growing, and it's growing really fast. Back in 2001, I was excited to move from internet into mobile because at that time I took a look at the growth numbers, the numbers that we were seeing in cell phone growth, and I said, wow, 250 million people on the web and 500 million people are using mobile phones. Mobile phones are clearly going to be a big factor. Those seemed like big numbers at the time if you compare them, say, for instance, to television audiences. TV audiences, and you know, if you reach 20 million people with the show, you're doing fantastically well nowadays. Here's where we are today. 2 billion internet users, 6 billion mobile phones, and we're well on track to exceed 7 billion, meaning that there'll be one mobile phone for every person on the planet. Fairly astonishing, but these numbers actually don't tell the whole story, because what's really important is who's connected via broadband, who's got the fast network. And this is where it's very interesting. 555 million fixed broadband lines and 1 billion mobile broadband lines. Mobile's growing about twice the rate of fixed broadband. That's worth paying attention to. It's quite clear now that most people are going to experience the internet and most of their media through their mobile phone. Their mobile phone is going to become kind of the ignition key for this great digital world that we live in. So the number of people connected to the web is growing astronomically fast. And so it's no surprise, given all these new tools and all the time we spend online, and all the number of people that are coming to this new technology, that the sheer amount of information that we produce as a culture is increasing, and it's increasing at an incredibly fast rate. We crossed an interesting threshold in 2010, where as a society we generated, for the first time we crossed the gigabyte threshold. Sorry, we crossed the zettabyte threshold. A zettabyte of data was created. Now you might be sitting there scratching your head saying, all right, I know what a gigabyte is, I think. I know what a terabyte is, I think. What's a zettabyte? Well, a zettabyte is 1 million gigabytes of data. 1 million gigabytes. Think of all those little flash drives. A million of those. So you take 1,000 megabytes, that equals 1 terabyte. You take 1,000 terabytes, sorry, 1 gigabyte. 1,000 gigabytes equals 1 terabyte. So you know you recently probably bought a terabyte drive to back up your computer, for instance. Now imagine 1,000 of those. That's 1 petabyte. That petabyte term is a term we used to use to talk about the amount of information we're creating, but now that term's out of date. We exceeded it in the last 5 years because we've moved into the exabyte range, which is 1,000 petabytes, and 1,000 exabytes is 1 zettabyte. And to put that in perspective for people in Hollywood, that's the equivalent of 250 billion DVDs, or 35 years high-definition video streaming nonstop. It's a staggering amount of information, and that's the amount of information our culture creates in a single year. But get this, we're not slowing down. In 2009, we created 0.8 zettabytes, so almost a zettabyte in 2009. In 2010, we crossed that threshold. This year, we'll greatly exceed it. By 2020, analysts predict that we'll generate 35 zettabytes of data each year. That is a staggering number. So if you think you're having information overload right now and you're contending with that, brace yourselves. You haven't seen anything yet. That sounds bad, but actually that suggests to me that there's a tremendous opportunity in the storing, archiving, management, retrieval, and processing of information. The opportunity to take unstructured data, which is about 80% of the data that we generate, it's unstructured, and turn it into something that's searchable and manageable. That's a tremendous business opportunity. Of course, there are many companies focused on it right now. We often hear people decry this information culture that we live in. I look at it differently. I look at this as a great big opportunity. But most people feel like that. That's how most of us feel, and it's understandable because we're not really equipped to do this. We've never really done this before as a culture. This is brand new for us, so it's a tough thing for us to experience. It's a tough thing to go through and move through. Fortunately, there's a cure. This 87 DVD program lasts 41 weeks long. It can help you cure. I'm totally horsing around with you. I saw this on the web. It's an April Fool's joke, but I just said, gosh, that isn't that great. You almost fall for it, right? You say, yeah, the cure for information overload is more information.